Bobby Orr's name is synonymous with both revolution and heartbreak in the world of hockey. He was the teenage phenom who redefined the role of an NHL defenseman, a Canadian wunderkind who tore down decades of rigid strategy, and the unparalleled skater whose end-to-end rushes left audiences gasping. Yet behind his many accolades, a Calder Trophy, 8 consecutive Norris Trophies, 2 Stanley Cups, multiple scoring titles, and a highlight reel of breathtaking plays, stands a sobering truth. Injuries, particularly the catastrophic damage to his knees, shortened a career that could have reached even greater heights. Fans still speak in reverent, almost mythic tones about the moment Bobby Orr's body could no longer handle the demands he placed upon it, a moment so pivotal it arguably changed the NHL forever. Born in Parry Sound, Ontario, on March 20th, 1948, Robert Gordon Orr demonstrated precocious talent from a young age. He grew up not only idolizing big league skaters, but also ignoring the conventional wisdom that dictated how a defenseman should play. In the 1950s and early 1960s, a blue liner's job was clear: stay at home, break up plays, and get the puck to the forwards. Scoring from the back end was more of an oddity than a system. Orr, however, was a forward's soul in a defenseman's body. Even as a child, he glided across the rink with breathtaking acceleration, often outpacing older, bigger opponents. Local coaches realized quickly that Bobby could contribute more to the team than simply plugging defensive gaps. If he was unstoppable with the puck, why limit him? Scouts from the Boston Bruins caught wind of this teenage prodigy who seemed to defy hockey logic. By 14, he was already drawing serious interest from professional franchises. The Bruins signed him at an astonishingly young age, a practice that would be condemned today, but was not uncommon during an era of looser restrictions. Orr joined the Ontario Hockey Association's Oshawa Generals, honing his puck-rushing style against older, more experienced junior players. There, he perfected what would become his signature move, blazing from behind his net, weaving through would-be checkers in the neutral zone, and entering the offensive zone with the impetus of a missile. Watching him as a junior was a sneak preview of the spectacle he would later bring to the NHL. The young defenseman debuted with the Bruins in the 1966-67 season, and expectations were astronomical. Boston had languished at or near the bottom of the NHL standings for several years, overshadowed by the dynastic Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs. Many pinned their hopes on Orr becoming the spark that would ignite a downtrodden franchise. He exceeded every possible expectation. In his rookie year, he collected 41 points in 61 games, a remarkable feat for a defenseman in an era when the game was lower scoring and stricter systems prevailed. He won the Calder Trophy easily, but more important, he introduced the league to a new brand of hockey: speed, offense from the back end, and a freewheeling style that offered a glimpse into the modern game. Yet even as a rookie, Orr had knee troubles. The NHL was a violent league, and physical intimidation reigned. Opponents tried, often in vain, to slow him with body checks and slashing. Opposing players soon realized that if you let Bobby Orr build up speed, you might find yourself left behind in an embarrassing scramble to catch him. In desperation, they'd bump or clip him at the knees, as that was the level where they might hamper his propulsion. These hits took their toll, prompting lingering pain that would resurface in each subsequent season. Already, the seeds of his ultimate downfall had been planted. In the 1967-68 season, Orr suffered his first major knee injury, torn ligaments that required surgery. Medical standards in the late 1960s were primitive compared to today's sophisticated procedures. Arthroscopic surgery existed but wasn't the norm, and sports medicine had only the most basic understanding of rehabilitation protocols. Players would often be told to tough it out, or to rely on rudimentary treatments that didn't address deeper damage. Orr returned to the lineup that season, but was never fully healthy, bracing his knee with wraps and grit to compensate for the compromised joint. On the ice, he masked the pain with adrenaline and raw talent. Off the ice, he spent hours icing, taping, and trying to keep the swelling manageable. Despite recurring injuries, Orr's ascent was unstoppable. The Bruins loaded up on talent, adding players like Phil Esposito, Ken Hodge, and Wayne Cashman. By the late 1960s, they had evolved into a force to be reckoned with. And at the center of it all was Bobby Orr, the quarterback of a dynamic offense that broke decades of staid tradition. Then in the 1969-70 season, he delivered one of the greatest individual performances in league history. He racked up 120 points, becoming the first defenseman in NHL history to score over 100 points in a season. He capped it off with the Stanley Cup winning goal against the St. Louis Blues in overtime of Game 4, a now iconic moment captured in a famous photograph of Orr flying through the air after being tripped immediately upon releasing the puck. That snapshot came to symbolize not just Bruins' glory, but the joyous, unrestrained style of play that Orr popularized. Even with his meteoric success, the knee problems lurked in the background. Throughout the 1970 playoffs, Orr required multiple painkiller injections just to get through games. Once the adrenaline of the cup run faded, surgeons opened his knee and found the damage extensive. Many players might have reconsidered the next steps, perhaps dialing back the flamboyant rushes or adopting a safer approach. That was not in Orr's nature. He played with the same fearless abandon he had as a boy in Parry Sound, unconcerned about potential harm and focused solely on excellence for his team. The 1970-71 season saw Orr break records once more, amassing an astonishing 139 points, a testament to his transcendent skill and willingness to fight through discomfort. He logged massive ice time in every situation, power plays, penalty kills, and crucial 5-on-5 matchups. Fans flocked to see him in away arenas, stunned at how a defenseman could single-handedly alter the flow of a game. Yet, as heroic as that campaign was, the surgical scars on Orr's left knee told a darker story. The joint was already degenerating under the relentless pounding. In many post-game interviews, Coach Harry Sinden acknowledged, "We try not to lean on him too much, but he's just so good. We need him out there." Another knee operation followed after the Bruins' 1971 playoff exit, one in which they were shockingly upset by the Montreal Canadiens. Nonetheless, Boston returned with a vengeance the next year, capturing another Stanley Cup in 1972 and further cementing Orr's legend. He claimed the Conn Smythe Trophy, but the celebrations in the locker room masked how often he'd returned to the bench wincing, his knee throbbing. By this point, it was well known among his inner circle that every stride brought pain, yet he persevered. In that era, the idea of playing hurt was idolized. The medical staff did what they could with limited resources, often draining fluid buildup or stabilizing the joint as best as possible before each practice or game. Orr's personal drive overshadowed any cautionary advice. For the next 2 seasons, the Bruins remained contenders, and Orr remained the most captivating figure in the NHL, winning Norris trophies year after year. Yet, with each surgery, he underwent over a dozen on the same knee, the cartilage eroded and the joint deteriorated. By the mid-1970s, murmurs began circulating that Bobby's best days were behind him. He was barely 25 years old, yet his knees resembled those of a retiree with advanced osteoarthritis. Opposing teams still dreaded his rushes, but they noticed small changes. He no longer blew past them with the same explosive step, and on certain nights, he seemed to favor one leg or slow up in the final minutes. Then came the 1975-76 season, an inflection point not just for Orr's career, but for the NHL as a whole. The Bruins were in flux, having traded away Phil Esposito early in the season. Orr was still the face of the franchise, but behind closed doors, contract negotiations took a nasty turn. He felt underappreciated by Bruins management and, at the same time, exhausted by the repeated surgeries. Though only 27, he had the mileage of a 40-year-old. His friend and agent, Alan Eagleson, encouraged him to consider free agency. That summer, he stunned the hockey world by signing with the Chicago Blackhawks, joining a franchise that hoped to revitalize its fortunes by landing the most dynamic defenseman in history. The headlines were colossal, and many Bruins fans felt betrayed. Few realized that Orr's left knee was already verging on collapse. In his first season with Chicago, Orr played only 20 games, his movement visibly compromised. Fans at the old Chicago Stadium found themselves torn between excitement over having Bobby Orr in their lineup and despair at seeing him struggle to turn, pivot, or unleash the breakaway sprints that had once defined him. Another knee surgery followed, then another. Eventually, it was clear that no operation could restore what he had lost. The cartilage was practically gone, leaving bone grinding on bone. Pain plagued him day and night. The question was no longer if he could remain a star, but whether he could skate at all. The final blow came during the 1978-79 season. By then, Orr was 30, but had missed nearly 2 entire seasons' worth of games over the previous few years. Early in that campaign, he laced up for the Black Hawks, determined to contribute in any way possible. But in a routine defensive zone scramble, he planted his left leg and tried to push off. He felt a sudden, excruciating jolt. That was it. His knee gave out for the last time. He hobbled off the ice, and although the official statement from the team mentioned he'd undergo a re-evaluation, those close to him knew it was likely the end. Orr attempted a comeback later in the year, but managed only 6 more games before succumbing to the inevitable. On November 8, 1978, though his retirement would not be formally announced until a few months later, Bobby Orr had effectively played his last meaningful NHL shift. That date, arguably, marked a turning point for the league. Orr's departure left a gaping hole, not only in the Chicago lineup, but in the entire hockey landscape. For a decade, he had been the magnet drawing new fans, the dynamic presence who made children want to lace up skates and emulate his style. He was also a pioneer who paved the way for future generations of offensive defensemen, Paul Coffey, Ray Bourque, Chris Chelios, and later Nicklas Lidstrom, Erik Karlsson, and Cale Makar. His abrupt collapse due to chronic injury forced the league to reckon with the darker realities of professional hockey. Teams began investing more in the nascent field of sports medicine. Prehab and rehab routines became more sophisticated, and eventually, arthroscopic surgery emerged as the gold standard for ligament and cartilage repair. Concussions, joint injuries, and overall player health started receiving a level of scrutiny that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Orr's contract saga with the Bruins, followed by his short-lived tenure with Chicago, underscored the fragility of a player's prime years. GMs, owners, and agents began to strategize differently, balancing the desire to sign marquee players for the long term with the recognition that injuries could derail a once-in-a-generation talent. Orr's experience served as a cautionary tale. Guaranteeing big money to a superstar carried an enormous injury risk. Moreover, players, newly aware of their own potential vulnerability, were more inclined to push for contract provisions that protected their interests if injuries compromised their careers. Beyond the organizational shifts in player care and contracts, the emotional impact on fans was palpable. Orr had been the smiling, cherubic face of a new era of hockey, one defined by speed, offense, and joy. The image of him limping off the ice brought a sense of collective mourning. Boston fans, still stung by his departure, felt robbed of the chance to see him retire in black and gold. Chicago fans felt cheated, as they never got to witness the unstoppable, skywalking version of Bobby Orr. And across the league, hockey enthusiasts realized that if someone as transcendent and game-breaking as Orr could be cut down in his prime, no one was truly immune to the ravages of the sport. In the years following his retirement, Orr tried to find his footing away from the ice. He briefly attempted to stay involved in hockey through coaching roles, even serving as an assistant coach for the Black Hawks. But his repeated knee surgeries left him in chronic pain, and his relationship with his once trusted agent Alan Eagleson dissolved amid revelations of financial mismanagement. Those controversies, Eagleson would eventually face criminal charges, highlighted how Orr's physical suffering was mirrored by personal betrayals off the ice. Through it all, he carried himself with a notable grace, seldom lashing out in anger, continuing to sign autographs for fans who still adored him, and focusing on philanthropic endeavors. When Bobby Orr was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1979, the normal 3-year waiting period was waived. He was just 31 years old, by far the youngest player ever given that honor at the time. It was a bittersweet celebration. Fans commemorated his unforgettable achievements, while simultaneously lamenting the abruptness of his exit. At the induction ceremony, Orr famously said, "I consider myself lucky to have played the game I love, lucky to have known the best fans in the world. Even if it didn't last as long as I'd hoped, I wouldn't change what I did out there." The cameras caught a man who seemed at peace with his ordeal, though it was clear to those who knew him that he still wished things could have turned out differently. Even decades after his final game, Bobby Orr remains deeply revered. His post-retirement endeavors include working with charitable organizations, mentoring young players, and maintaining a consistent presence at NHL events. Fans who were fortunate enough to witness his brilliance in person still recount those nights as if describing a mythical hero. Younger generations absorb the legend through grainy footage, marveling at rushes that look shockingly modern for the 1970s. And whenever talk arises about what-if scenarios, what if he had played in the 1980s with modern surgical techniques, or even in today's NHL with advanced rehab and training, the imagination runs wild. One wonders how many scoring titles, Norris trophies, and Stanley Cup victories might have been within his grasp.